This is Pastor Nathan. Welcome to the Sitting With It podcast. Each week I sit down with someone from my congregation to discuss the past Sunday's sermon. I hope this helps all of us to go deeper with the sermon, thinking about it, digesting it, and living it out in our lives. Let's get into it. So on Sunday, we talked a little bit about Jesus when his parents brought him to the temple, and he ends up in these debates with the teachers and leaders there as a 12-year-old, and kind of recognizing that he learned that stuff somewhere. And tradition would say, and also just understanding of Jewish culture in the first century, that he learned that at home. And then also looking at the pattern throughout Scripture of, raising children and passing on the faith to them, but then also recognizing that looks different in different times, and it's always difficult, but it also, there can be a lot of shame around those topics. And so then we had Carol Longacre and Jenna Commons both shared, as well as me, on a panel of some of our own experiences of being raised in Christian homes and how the faith was passed on to us. And it was kind of a whole range of different experiences, and also how we've tried to pass the faith on to our own children within our homes over the years. So yeah, as you listen to that, it was kind of a little different from a normal sermon. But what were maybe your reflections or things that you noticed or stood out to you from what was said? I mean,
coming from a musician at heart, music sticks out. The fact that Carol brought up music. Did Jenna bring up music? I thought she brought up songs.
Yeah, she talked about playing songs with her own kids.
Right, okay. And somebody mentioned singing "O Come All Ye Faithful" as it was somebody's favorite song. So, I think music winds its way through everybody. And like you said, if you want to reach a generation, write their songs, not their sermons. And I've heard, you're never going to remember a line from a sermon. You're going to remember the line from the song. So the music is what sticks out to me as being cross generations. And that's one of the things that we are trying to, maybe not trying to push on our kids, but try to help them filter a little bit. As I was saying, garbage in, garbage out. The music you're listening to, the words are into your brain, whether you think about it or not. So not that we want to, what's the right word? Not that we want to restrict them from listening to things, because that's what my parents did, was you can't listen to anything but like classical music or like Christian music with maybe a piano in it. And so we're trying to go the opposite way with our kids. Like, yes, this is the world we live in, and God has given people talent. So they can listen to whatever as long as we're okay with it, basically. And so that's why we have Isaac playing Queen on the piano right now.
What do you think led you to still caring about what music it is that your kids listen to, but not approaching it in the same way of how your parents did?
I think that's what every parent wants for their kids, is like, you don't want to screw up your kids in the way that you were screwed up in. So you take sometimes the opposite approach. And so my parents, they were very strict. Like, we didn't have a TV growing up at all. So my knowledge of pop culture is just like none. So I felt completely left out when I got to college. Like, I had no way to connect with anybody. So we're trying to walk the middle ground of a little bit, but probably swaying too much on the other, pendulum's now all this side of things.
So you had like a response of like, well, we're not going to do it that way, but you still kept some of,
right?
Like,
yeah.
You're not just saying, well, you can listen to whatever you want. You still care and are moderating it somewhat.
Right. Yeah,
so,
I can see they had good intentions, I think, and that might have just been the style at the time of growing up in the 80s and early 90s. That, was it backmasking was a thing? Do you remember that?
Oh yes, where like
if you play music
backwards,
backwards, it says satanic things or so.
Yes,
and so they're like, oh, there's subliminal messages and everything, so you can't. So I don't believe that. So I think there's something good in exposing kids like this is the world you live in. This is out there, so you can be aware of what's out there, but be aware that there's sin in everything too. So be cautioned against. Just be careful, I guess is the road we're trying to take there.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize some of that actually about how you grew up. So I also grew up without a TV. And then, yeah, I would say for me and Dana, it's been a similar journey of, she grew up in a household that didn't have too much moderation from her parents. Both her parents were first generation Christians. And so that probably impacted some of their household. So yeah, we've tried to find that middle ground of exposing our kids to things, like not sheltering them,
Right.
but also letting them know, like, as Christians, we live in an alternative kingdom, that like we don't just have to take in everything that's out there.
Yep. Yeah. And especially we try to drive that, like, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And there are a lot of things you don't want to see.
Yeah. So what else stood out to you, either from Sunday or kind of thinking about your own relationship with your kids or your family?
So mostly I related with what Jenna was saying. You know, families tried, and like Amy and I, we try, but we never get anything consistent. So I'm happy that other people are in the same boat, because life goes on. But I feel like our trying is, bringing kids to church, bringing them to Sunday school, and they have chapel at schools, and thinking about it more. Amy is really good about just in everyday life reminding the kids, no matter what happens, God's always in control. He's never surprised about what's going on. We're not doing anything strict or regimented, which I think my kids would probably rebel against if we tried to do anything like that. But, just throughout the day, throughout the daily course of life, as things are going on, Amy's always reminding them, God's in control. He's not surprised, no matter what happens.
And that's something that Jenna talked about a little bit. And then we, like others, I think it kind of reflected on too, of like different approaches around having regimented times of worship in the home, is, more trying to integrate faith into everything that happens. Yeah. Also recognizing they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like you could do both kind of things together in parallel tracks. You mentioned some of the backmasking from the 80s and 90s, and that your parents maybe were like, they weren't coming to these conclusions on their own, right? So they were parenting in a way that they were being trained to parent by the broader Christian culture at the time.
Dr. Dobson.
Yeah. Yep.
I think my mom still brings him up. She brought him up this weekend when we were in Arizona about something. I don't remember what, but
yeah. And so I wonder, as you guys have been on the parenting journey even longer than Dana and I have, what are maybe like resources out there that you have used and to kind of think about your own parenting, or like, what do you think is shaping our generation of parents today?
Oh, I have to think about that. I mean, there's lots of books out there that Amy's like, you should read this one. And I'm like, yeah, I probably should read that one. But I think most of what's shaping me is trying not to be my parents. So not to have our kids end up like me, basically, and to have them end up more like Amy, because, so my family was very atomic, I guess is the right word. Like, we hardly ever went and visited people. My grandparents would come to see us. We hardly ever went to see them. Amy's family is the opposite. Family is very important to them. So I think we're trying to raise our kids with the thought of family in mind and keeping relationships close. I can't think of any specific resources we used other than just the examples of Amy's family. And a few choice people from my family. My grandparents on my mom's side were very good.
You mentioned a couple times about your family's faith. So what did, like, even though you didn't have regular devotional rhythms, you're a Christian, right?
Right.
And so like, what did that look like? How, like you mentioned your grandparents now. And so how would you say the faith was instilled to you, or that you ended up following the way of Jesus?
I'd say it fell on more the fire and brimstone side of things. My grandpa was he grew up in he was a first generation American. Like, he was the only person in his family born in America. Everybody else emigrated from Russia. So he grew up, I assume he grew up in that kind of Eastern Orthodox kind of environment. And I feel like we're kind of gradually becoming less strict in some regards. So, growing up in the Baptist church, it was more like, you're going to go to hell if you don't become saved. Like, nothing about how, what that means. Just like, you're going to go to hell. I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to hell. So, and then eventually we moved to it was more of a missionary church, which was just very, very safe church, I guess is the right way to say it. And that's what I remember most. Had my friends there, good youth group there, very small church. I think, and I think that's what kind of started making me realize there's more to faith than just fear, I guess. And then from there, growing up, I think a lot of it was after I met Amy, and just the whole different perspective on life that comes from being a Mennonite background. And at first I was like, you guys are insane. Like, all of my friends would be like, I've got guns by every single window in my house so I could shoot anybody that comes near. And that's completely opposite. And, the more that I'm here, the more that I'm thinking about things, the more I think, what would Jesus do? And he would not be one of my friends from back there. And yeah, here I am now, 45 years later.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I don't want to overstate this, but as I just listened to that very short history of your family's faith, thinking about like your grandfather coming from Eastern Orthodoxy or, something like
something
that.
Right there, yeah.
And then
left Germany to escape Nazis, went to Russia, then came here, yeah.
Yeah, and then moving into, more of a kind of a Baptist way of thinking, and then moving into a Mennonite, like taking scripture seriously, taking community seriously, but also like, what would Jesus do? Like really taking that seriously. Yeah, so I don't want to overstate it, but it almost sounds to me, just hearing that, like in a way, like your story is an extension of their story. And like you mentioned your parents having good intentions, that maybe there were things they fell into that aren't the way you would approach it, or, maybe weren't the best things to do. Yeah. But that them growing and seeking Jesus actually led you to where you are today in some ways.
Yeah. I think they're happy with how I turned out. Sometimes I wonder if they wonder how I turned out this way, but I think they look at us now and they're happy with how me and my family are, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think of the sermon I preached last week, not this week with the Sharing Sunday, but and I don't know if you got to hear that one or not, but I essentially talked about like the greatest gift we can give our kids is our own repentance.
Right. Yep.
That when we actually genuinely seek Jesus, our kids see that and it's modeled for them. And so then thinking about kind of some of these more like intentional practices of spiritual practices in the home, and having that not having been your experience, and also with your own family, like you've tried things at times, but more it's kind of like living it in everyday life. I'm curious what your thoughts are around having more intentional practices. Is it like intriguing? Is it interesting? Are you like, I'm not sure it's necessary? And yeah, feel free to like just be blunt and honest. But like, I wonder what your responses or thoughts are around that.
I always feel somewhat ashamed, honestly, and down on myself. Like, I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not doing enough. We always have good intentions. Like at the start of this year, we're like, all right, we're going to listen to, what's that Bible series where they read scripture and then the lady explains it in pretty good detail. The one that I think there's a group here from church that did it. Yeah. I don't remember.
Bill
Rosenberger introduced it to me. Yeah. And it reads in chronological order. So you're starting with Job, which is super boring, but she explains it in a really good way. And we made it like 2 weeks. I mean, we have a half-hour drive to school, so we have plenty of time. But then, as school gets going on, then sports come in, and then pretty soon they're doing homework on the way to school. And so I feel like, there went that plan. Maybe we'll try again next year. So, so yeah, it's always there in the back of my mind. Like, yeah, we should be doing more, but how could we fit it in? And that's where we are. It's like, how do we fit that in our life? Like, what has to go to make room for this? And then, am I what am I prioritizing? So always these questions floating around. Are we doing the right things? You know, we're trying to raise our kids to be mindful of the world, you know, just have a bigger worldview. And I think that's something I grew up with, as a very small worldview. And so we're of the mind that they should try everything, you know, and we push them to do that. But then they enjoy those things, and then they want to keep doing them. And then, well, now every single day is completely filled to the brim, and now we're back, well, we don't have any margin. So now, like, are we making the right choices to push them and try to get that bigger worldview, but are we missing something because we filled our life so full? So that's where I'm at right now, kind of wrestling with that.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that so, like, succinctly and vulnerably, because I think, like, I'm right there with you. We wrestle with the same things, and we're, 10 years behind. So I'm in a generation where, like, I feel like I even have learned a little bit from watching, like, you're kind of on the top end of my generation, right? But, like, and I think in general, like, me and the next 10 years below me, I have reacted a little bit against some of that. Like, we haven't enrolled our kids in sports intentionally because we've seen that. But at the same time, we still don't have time to do these family devotional practices. So yeah, the way you phrased it all, I think is what every Christian parent that I've talked to wrestles with. But I love to hear, like, the wrestling that you are wrestling, you are thinking about it, and there is intention in that, even if it hasn't led to, like, a practice that we do every week.
An actual regimen of something. I mean, we're regimented our own way. We have to be to make it to all those things. So as we left our house this morning at 6:15 because Isaac's doing chamber choir, and so he has to be there at 7 to practice. So I'm like, kids, if you can learn this level of discipline in your life, it'll suit you well to be able to get up and just do it. So in some regards, it's paying off, but we'll see. I mean, maybe our kids will go the other direction and be like, we're not doing anything.
Yeah. I wonder, as you talk about that, and I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but I wonder how some of that has changed over the years from when your kids were younger to now them being more in the teen years where they have more opportunity to do things. Like, has your schedule pretty much been the same? And then how has that impacted family spiritual rhythms?
I think we definitely had more time when they were younger because there wasn't the opportunity to do things. So I think we still managed to do all the same church level things. Like, we always tried to find a youth group. In Alaska, we had Awana that we took the kids to for a while. And then when we moved here, we brought them to clubs. East Swamp, when we were at East Swamp, we were doing youth group there. So we still always managed to fit in church. Like, I still feel like church is the priority. And whenever they have a game on a Sunday, I'm always like, yeah, what should we do? It's still, I still struggle with that. I remember when I was a kid, like, I think it was my choice. Like, I refused to play on a team that played on Sundays. And now I'm like, I wish I could have played. And so with my kids, when they have a tournament or something on a Sunday, I'm like, yeah, well, your team kind of needs you, but we struggle with that. I mean, we'll still try to make church and youth group and all that stuff the priority and try to fit in all the other stuff still.
Yeah. And that's the Menno Simons quote. That's the one thing that he talks about that is convicting for me. And, like, I've been processing over the last week and a half after having read it again. He talks about, like, essentially people of the world, right? So people who are not following Jesus in any meaningful way, are essentially training their children into pride, into greed, into, like, essentially everything that happens is focused on how do you accumulate as much as you can in life? How do you elevate yourself as much as you can? And that, like, we should be different in the kingdom of heaven, and we should be teaching our children to love and towards humility. And what I like about that quote is that it's not focused on the actual concrete action, right? So like, and he could have, like, in his own day, I'm sure there was the actual tangibles of, like, should we play sports or not?
Right. Yeah.
And he could have named stuff like that, but he didn't. He more looked at the heart. And then I think it's, like, up to each generation to wrestle out what that looks like. Like I grew up in a family like yours, right, where you said about not playing on a Sunday, whether it was your choice or and I'm sure it was influenced by the culture you're in, right?
Yeah.
And so we weren't allowed to do travel sports, we weren't allowed to do a lot of things because like those things were seen as inherently evil. And I think I'm more at a spot of saying like maybe some of them are, right? Like maybe there's demonic influences in our culture that are like fighting against, but at the same time, like Jesus regularly went to those who were demon possessed. And I don't want to overstate that, right?
Yeah.
But in the sense of like, what is it like? What are our intentions?
Right.
And that's what I'm hearing from you is like the intention to pay attention to these things, care about these things, and lead your kids in a way that they are like living a life for Christ as long as they're under the, you guys still have some level of control over their lives as their parents, right? And so leading them that way, but also wrestling with what that means and looks like.
And I think if the situations they were in weren't as good as they are, we would have second thoughts. But I mean, at these coaches meeting for school sports, soccer and baseball, what my boys are playing, both coaches are like, we're teaching them to be men of God first, athletes second. So I feel like they're learning the right attitude, an attitude of humility as they're playing sports. So if it were different, we'd probably think a little bit different. But I feel like even they're getting the right direction that goes along with how we're trying to train them. I guess it makes me a little bit more comfortable with how busy we are. Is that it's still pushing them in the right direction.
Yeah, and you mentioned like how your family was so atomic and kind of focused in internally and being like refreshed. I'm putting words in your mouth, but being refreshed by kind of this perspective that is more like interacting with extended family, actually visiting with others and beyond just family, like having those other relationships. And so then thinking about how that's impacted how you even pass the faith on to your kids, that it's less focused on just what you're teaching them, but actually surrounding them with community and others who love Jesus, who also are building into their lives.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And we wouldn't be able to do what we do without that community. With Larry helping us and Kristen helping us at times. So yeah, opening that up and just even allowing them to help us, I think is hopefully something that they'll reach back. Because now I'm wondering, like, did my parents refuse help? Did they not want help from other people? So, and then you get the attitudes of the other people. Like Larry is just the most relaxed person in the world. I mean, having him around, I hope is a good impact on my kids, because he's just, I mean, he is the living image of God is in control. Like, whatever happens, So I hope that something of him rubs off on my kids, because I'm not that way in a lot of things.
Yeah, that's something I've said about my dad. Is the greatest gift he gave us as teenagers was allowing other men to speak into our lives. And at the time, I didn't realize how big of a gift that was. But now I realize, like, that's a big deal. When we were 12, 13 years old, him letting other men speak into our lives. I started working when I was 12, and my boss was a Christian that really shaped me in a lot of key ways through my teen years. And now as a parent, I'm like, that's a tough decision. I'm sure there were things my dad disagreed with him on, but he was still willing to allow him to speak into my life.
Interesting. Now you mentioned, I can remember one guy that we kind of had relationships with. I don't know if he taught Sunday school or what, but he was a Navy SEAL and he taught us all to shoot. So that was the type I grew up with, is the guy with he probably had 1,000 guns in his house. And that was what I grew up with.
Yeah. I grew up with a truck driver who had gone to seminary. So he had a master's in divinity just because he wanted to learn more about God.
Okay.
And so like he taught me Greek when I was like 17 years old.
Wow.
We met once a week at his house.
Okay.
And my violin teacher, I've shared about him in sermons before that, he had like, I think it's like 5 of his students and his own son all have become pastors. And so, yeah, like I'm very blessed, and I always say, like, I stand on the shoulders of good elders that have been around me, and I use the term elders loosely, right? But then reflecting on that, like my dad was willing to release his own input in my life to allow these others to give input. So,
yeah, and I think in the boy of our kids, they go to the coop with the youth group and we got Brandon and Hillary there. So like, all right, Brandon, we're leaving these guys to you. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, so anything else from what was shared on Sunday, either reflections, questions, disagreement, or we've already been talking about how to kind of apply it in your life, but just any other reflections that you have.
No, I think it was a good conversation, and hopefully kind of made the gears turn in people's heads, because it definitely did in mine. Yeah, I enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks for joining me here, and your perspective is even a little different too. So I hope that others continue to learn from that, and I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, cool. Thank you. Yeah, me too. It's good.